Good morning, and thank you for being here. My name is Charlie Hatt. I'm the climate director and a lawyer at Ecojustice, and we're joining you from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. Prime Minister Mark Carney has said that climate action is a moral duty and an economic imperative, and we agree it is both of those things, but it's also something more. It is a legal obligation. Today, Ecojustice, on behalf of 3 young Canadians and health and environmental organizations, is taking Prime Minister Carney's government to court for its climate plan that we say violates the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. That law requires the federal government to set science-based climate targets, have a credible plan for meeting them, and report to Canadians on progress. Its purpose is to drive the action that will protect our communities, our families, and our environment from growing climate harms like heat waves, wildfires, and flooding. The amazing opportunities of the global transition toward clean energy mean that Canada can have a climate plan that meets its legal obligations and serves its economic and moral interests. But over the last year, we have watched the Carney government weaken, delay, and repeal Canada's key climate policies without identifying credible alternatives to make up the gap, all while doubling down on a future powered by fossil fuels. It is time for accountability before the law. We are asking the court to order the federal government to amend the 2030 climate plan so that it describes key measures the government intends to take to achieve Canada's 2030 emissions target. In short, we're asking for a plan to achieve the target, not a plan to fail. The young people behind me today will be the ones living with the consequences of this government's decisions for their whole lives, and we'll hear from them now. First, Sophia Mathur.
Good morning. I'm Sophia Mathur from Sudbury, Ontario. Recently, I had the opportunity to meet Prime Minister Mark Carney. I asked him one thing: to keep the climate promises his government made to Canadians. Last November, Prime Minister Carney pledged before Parliament that his government will respect Canada's 2030 emissions target and is determined to achieve it. Thousands of Canadians saw that pledge and wanted to believe those promises. For my entire life, governments have told young people that climate action is a priority. We've heard it in speeches, during election campaigns. We've heard promise after promise. But promises without a plan are not enough. When political leaders say they are committed to climate action while dismantling the very policies needed to achieve it, young people notice, because we are the ones who will be facing and living with the consequences of that. And that is why I'm here today. My generation's first decades on this planet will have been marked by wildfire seasons, floods, heat waves, and constant warnings from scientists that the window for action is closing. Prime Minister Mark Carney, the tragedy of climate change is not on the distant horizon. It is something that we are facing right now. When I was 12 years old, I took my provincial government to court over dangerous climate rollbacks. Now, I'm challenging the federal government over theirs. My parents taught me that when you make a promise, you keep it. The federal government made a promise, a legal commitment to meet its climate target. Now it must keep its word. I'm here because my future deserves more than a promise. It deserves a plan. Thank you.
Good morning. I think I'm speaking next. My name is Dr. Samantha Green. I'm a family doctor right here in my Regent Park office in Toronto, and I'm the president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. As a family doctor, I know that climate change is not an abstract environmental issue. It is one of the greatest health threats of our time. I have a patient who lives with her teenage son in a one-bedroom apartment without working air conditioning. Last summer, they both suffered many sleepless nights in their oven-like apartment. Her son's asthma was triggered if they opened the window. My patient experienced severe depression and her chronic pain condition worsened. I have another patient who developed an extensive heat rash last summer, which evolved into a serious skin infection and caused extensive scarring across both of his thighs. Experiences like this are playing out across Canada. Patients are suffering from the effects of extreme heat, wildfire smoke, severe storms, and climate-related anxiety. Communities are facing disruptions to their health, safety, and well-being. These are not future risks. This is reality here and now. At the most fundamental level, our government has a responsibility to protect the well-being of its people. At best, it should be doing everything in its power to defend its citizens from this harm. It certainly should not be pursuing a course of action that will actually escalate climate harms to communities across the country now and into the future. And yet, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, we have seen a sweeping dismantling of climate policy without a credible plan to reduce emissions and meet Canada's 2030 target. These decisions benefit oil and gas billionaires, and they put the health and safety of everyday citizens at risk. Fortunately, the law is clear about the government's obligations, and that is what this case is all about, getting the federal government to follow the law. The well-being, health, and safety of people across the country depend on it, which is why doctors like me, through CAPE, are joining this lawsuit. Thank you.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Shirley Barnea. Je suis une étudiante de Montréal, Québec. I would like to take you back to this time 3 years ago. Canada was overwhelmed with its worst wildfire season in recorded history, sparked by dry weather conditions made twice as likely by climate change. In Quebec alone, a forested area the size of Denmark was burned. From coast to coast, smoke darkened the skies and forced thousands to flee. For days, my home city of Montreal had the worst air quality in the entire world. The 2023 wildfires cost Canada's governments $1.1 billion. Their smoke cost 5,400 people their lives. Last year, during Canada's second worst wildfire season, many of us looked to Prime Minister Carney's government for a sign they would take our security seriously. Instead, we saw what few future-proofing climate policies we still had left scrapped or weakened. Now, experts and our minister and Parliament's own reporting recognize that current policies put our 2030 target out of reach. With this court challenge today, I'm asking the federal government to stand by its obligations under the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. Young people deserve a sustainable economy, good green jobs, and a government with a credible plan to get us there. Thank you.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Marie Maltais, je suis une étudiante engagée auprès des jeunes Québécois pour soutenir leurs initiatives environnementales et pour faire entendre leur voix. Comme c'est le cas pour beaucoup d'entre nous, j'ai un attachement profond avec ma ville natale, Sainte-Catherine-de-la-Jacques-Cartier. C'est un attachement qui me pousse à vouloir la protéger. J'ai toutefois vécu des expériences qui sont malheureusement devenues monnaie courante pour bon nombre de jeunes Canadiens. En effet, j'ai été témoin à plusieurs reprises de ciel orangé, d'un air rendant difficile les activités de plein air avec lesquelles j'ai grandi, d'hivers de plus en plus courts et de printemps marqués d'inondations. Le Canada se réchauffe déjà 2 fois plus vite et le nord du Québec 3 fois plus vite que la moyenne mondiale. Ces effets sont le résultat des choix des gouvernements passés. Les choix de notre premier ministre façonneront donc inévitablement notre avenir à nous. Je pose donc la question suivante au premier ministre Carney, dont les parents travaillaient eux aussi pour des jeunes. Si l'objectif de 2030 de votre gouvernement est toujours celui que vous respectez, comme vous l'avez déclaré devant le Parlement l'automne dernier, quel est votre plan pour l'atteindre? Considérant que les adultes de votre vie ont œuvré pour laisser à votre génération un monde meilleur, comment vous assurez-vous, en tant que Premier ministre du Canada, de faire de même pour nous? To finish, I'd like to echo back the very words that earned our Prime Minister such acclaim last year in Davos. Hope is not a plan, and nostalgia is not a strategy. Merci.
My name is Julia Levin. I'm the Associate Director of the National Climate Program at Environmental Defence Canada. The Prime Minister has taken a wrecking ball to our hard-fought climate progress. He has gutted environmental protections, given free rein to polluters, and ended programs that would allow Canadians to save money on their energy bills, just to name a few examples. Despite acknowledging that addressing climate change is both a moral obligation and an economic imperative, the Prime Minister has not presented any plan or any evidence to back his decision-making. It is a deeply irresponsible and cynical way to govern, and there's Canadians who are already paying the price through wildfires, heat waves, rising food insecurity, and high costs of living. Climate targets are not abstract. They are what stands between Canadians and catastrophic weather events, lost ecosystems, and a withering economy. Canadians have every right to feel betrayed. People in this country care deeply about the climate crisis. Over 30 million Canadians want the federal government to take bold action and make Canada a renewable energy superpower, not an antiquated petrostate. They believe that the Prime Minister would govern with their best interest at heart, not the best interests of wealthy oil CEOs and their foreign shareholders. Countries around the world are rapidly transitioning to clean energy. Solar and wind are already more affordable, reliable, secure than fossil fuels, in addition to being cleaner. Soon, no one will want Canada's fossil fuels. If the Prime Minister continues on his current path, we will be left behind in the energy transition. Instead of watching where the rest of the world is going, the Prime Minister is copying President Trump's short-sighted and destructive playbook. By keeping us dependent on expensive and volatile fossil fuels, Prime Minister Carney is setting Canada up for failure. The young people standing here should not have to be in court demanding a lawful climate plan. Neither should we, as climate experts. But Prime Minister Carney has shut experts out from his decision-making and is clearly not listening to those within his governments when they raise concerns. We have been left with no other option. When governments abandon their responsibilities, we have every right and every reason to fight back and protect what we love.
So that concludes remarks, and we'll now take questions, as many as we can in the remaining time that we have.
Maybe just some very practical, logistical questions. David Thornton, CBC News. So is this a lawsuit, a judicial review? What exactly is the action that you're taking?
Yes, this is a lawsuit. It's an application for judicial review against the federal government in federal court, seeking to have them comply with two duties under the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. So that act requires the government, the federal government, to have a climate plan for achieving its targets. The federal government hasn't weakened or resiled from its 2030 climate target. In fact, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change reaffirmed that climate target, as did the Prime Minister near the end of last year. So the target stands, but what there isn't anymore is a plan to achieve it. There was a plan established under the Act several years ago, but its key measures for achieving the target are ones that this government, clearly on the evidence and its own reporting, no longer intends to take. So the legislation requires there to be a plan for achieving the target, and that plan to include the key measures the government intends to take for achieving the target. That's the state of play. What the lawsuit seeks is for the federal court to order the government to amend its climate plan so that it becomes one that is in compliance with the law. It is a plan for achieving the target, and it describes the key measures the government actually intends to take, rather than the ones it's repealed or hobbled for achieving the target.
And so it was filed in federal court when?
The application was filed yesterday.
It was filed yesterday, and so, okay, and we can probably get a copy of that.
Yes, oh yeah. Copy can be provided.
Okay.
In terms of, we've seen some other kind of similar cases play out at the provincial level. I'm wondering kind of what lessons learned, have been taken from, the situation in Ontario, for example, that you're going to bring here.
Sure. I'll speak briefly legally, but maybe call on Sophia after as the lead applicant in that case. So this case is the first time that the federal climate accountability law is going to be interpreted by the federal court. Previous instances of Government of Canada setting targets and then not meeting them have happened outside of having a climate accountability law like this. So we see this as a key opportunity to hold the government accountable to its commitments and to its duties under the law. That's a key distinction. There's never been this law to leverage at previous times. But perhaps...
Just one more legal before.
Okay,
I'd love to hear from Sophia as well. Because this has never been interpreted at the federal level before, like how important is this going to be, not just when we're thinking about 2030, but beyond?
It will be very important because the structure of the Act is successive milestone year targets every 5 years, 2030, then 2035, and so on. And each time a plan needs to be made to meet that target. So if the government can simply set and forget that climate plan, make it, and then later down the line just eliminate all the key measures for achieving the target, then one might reasonably question, how is this act that is meant to hold the government accountable on climate serving its purpose? And so we think that an interpretation of the act that understands that purpose of accountability, that drives action towards meeting our climate goals and protecting Canadians and our environment from climate harms, is one that will win the day. But I'd be interested to hear the lessons from Sophia, who's been involved.
Yeah, I joined the Ontario case against the Ford government when I was 12 years old. So it's a long process, but I would say I think the significance and importance of both is important. I think the major takeaway for me is the fact that youth engagement is really important. Both cases surround the fact that there are youth plaintiffs and the tragedy that climate change has on our future and our fear for the environment that we're living in and the job security and our economy. I think it's important that we challenge all levels of government because overall government and politicians have the responsibility to protect our future. That is their job. It is their job to stick to climate plans that they set. It is their job to protect the youth. And I think that both cases, although on a legal standpoint, are slightly different. The Ontario case is a charter rights, while this is administrative, still have the same effect and importance of conversation.
Just one quick follow-up for you. You said that you joined the Ontario case when you were 12. I don't know exactly how old you are now, but it has been going on for quite a while. Are you, as someone who's actively growing up through the climate crisis, are you concerned about the amount of time that these things do take to play out in the courts?
Yes, I'm 19 now, so it has been some time. I think that I understood when I signed up for that case that it was a long process. It's upsetting to know that in that time the Ford government still has not taken proper action to protect our environment and to protect our future. I think that it's disappointing. When I joined the climate movement when I was 7 years old. I've been in this for the long run, and this is not where I saw myself in 12 years, honestly. I was hoping by this time that we would have stricter climate policies and plans, but it feels like it is an endless amount of promises with no effective plan, and it was disappointing to hear when I was 11, and it's disappointing to hear when I am 19 now, today.
I just want to understand, so obviously you have this case against the government, but their defense could also be that they have the climate competitiveness strategy and they have all these plans to target emissions. They just want to do things differently now than before, and they're maybe putting in place different strategies. I'm just trying to understand what your defense would be in that case. Like, how is your case going to be strong enough to fight that?
So what we're asking for is the court to order that the government amend its plan under the legislation to reflect the reality of its policy decisions. They haven't done that. There's an amendment process under the Act that is there for this purpose, that when the government decides they're going to bring in new policies, or change key measures under the plan, they use that amendment process, and two key things happen then. One, there is a right to public consultation for interested persons like the 3 youth applicants standing here, or civil society organizations, for expert input, for input from Indigenous peoples, and the net zero advisory body created under that law. So by not amending, by failing to amend its climate plan, doing the climate competitiveness strategy outside the confines of this law, they are avoiding that public consultation process, which would give Canadians a say in what the amended plan should look like. And the second key thing about amendment is that it requires the amendment to be consistent with the purposes of the Act. And the purposes of the Act are about transparency and accountability, but especially immediate and ambitious action to achieve Canada's targets and our international commitments. So by failing to amend and follow the procedure set out in the law, all of that is left off to the side. And we say that's contrary to the governmental duties that exist here.
Okay.
Can I add into the part of that question? Sure. I mean, the competitiveness strategy was an empty strategy. So far, what we've seen from the government is a weakening down or gutting of all of the key pieces of the emission reduction plan: industrial carbon pricing, the carbon tax, methane regulations, clean electricity regulations, the net zero, the zero electric vehicles sales mandate. We have not seen any math around any of those decisions, and that's what this act does. Is it requires transparency and accountability, and neither of those are being followed through at the moment. And nothing that the government has proposed makes up for what it has gutted, eliminated, dismantled.
So based on what you said, the sense that I'm getting is A, public consultations are essential, and B, they need more, you're saying, concrete plans on how they are going to meet their emissions reduction targets.
Yes, it's not us saying that. The law says that the government is required to have a climate plan for achieving its target, not a climate plan for some other set of reasons. And I just want to be clear that the amendment process would be an opportunity for this government to identify new policies, new measures that could make up the gap and that could serve the other economic, security, sovereignty, moral interests of the country.
But the government still maintains, despite all the climate rollbacks, they still maintain that it is their goal to meet the targets. I'm just trying to understand how you're going to make them feel more accountable if they have all these measures that they say that they're going to be doing.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please, Shirley.
Yeah, so the idea with this lawsuit is not to tell the government, you must put in place this measure or that measure. The idea is to say you have to have measures that collectively as a plan allow you to meet the 2030 target. And the government's own reporting has shown that under current policies, that's not possible. So the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act requires progress reports. The latest progress report in 2025 found that under current policies, we would only achieve between 20 and 28% reductions compared to 2005, whereas the target is 40 to 45%. So the progress report under this act has admitted that currently we're not able to meet our target. Well, we're saying we need an amendment process to have a new plan that will allow us to meet that target. And it's not about this one measure or that, but currently the climate competitiveness strategy is objectively incapable of meeting its targets.
All right, so just a quick reminder for the people joining us on Zoom. If you have a question, please use the raise hand function. Pour les gens qui nous joignent sur Zoom, si vous pouvez utiliser la fonction main levée. Je vois que Stéphane Blais de la presse canadienne, la parole est à toi.
Oui, bonjour. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Et on vous entend.
Parfait. Au début de la période de questions, on vous a posé la question en anglais. Quels sont les bons termes techniques là, de cette action en justice-là? Vous avez parlé d'application for judicial review. Est-ce que vous pouvez l'expliquer? C'est un contrôle judiciaire. Pouvez-vous expliquer quels sont les bons termes à utiliser là, en français?
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Blais.
Thank you, Karine.
Sorry.
Bonjour.
Oui, donc c'est un recours administratif et c'est, comme vous dites, un recours en contrôle judiciaire d'une décision administrative de l'État fédéral C'est un recours qui se devrait être un petit peu plus simple qu'un recours en vertu des chartes, qui est le recours auquel a pris part Mme Mathur contre l'Ontario.
OK. C'est un recours en contrôle judiciaire d'une... Ensuite, qu'est-ce que vous avez dit?
Décision administrative de l'État. Ou ici, une absence de décision, c'est-à-dire de ne pas avoir mis à jour leur plan alors qu'ils n'ont plus l'intention de prendre les mesures qui y sont incluses.
Okay.
Est-ce que ça fait une phrase complète dans l'ensemble ou je dois recommencer?
Non, ça va.
OK.
OK, merci.
Tu as une question, Stéphane? Stéphane, tu as une question de suivi?
Non.
Can you just give us an overview of maybe climate litigation, including the case that, Sophia, that you brought? Like, where is that at? Have they been successful? Have they just been making their way through the system?
So there have been a number of lawsuits started to hold governments at different levels, provincial or federal, accountable on climate action. The Mathur lawsuit that Sophia is the lead applicant in Ontario is still proceeding. It's currently in a motion before the Ontario Court of Appeal, dealing with the Ford government's rollback of its climate target at the end of last year, but it's still proceeding. There's a case in federal court based on a theory of charter rights violations against the federal government, the La Rose case, and that is heading to trial in the fall. So what has happened so far is there have been key precedents set along the way. So in the Mathur litigation, arguments that you often hear from governments, such as this isn't justiciable, it's not the right kind of issue to bring before the courts, it's too political or something like that. Causation, that how can you prove that a climate target or government climate action of that sort causes, harms to your health or risks to your health? These kinds of issues have been surmounted in that litigation. Key decisions from the Ontario Court of Appeal that were attempted to be appealed further to the Supreme Court and leave to appeal denied. So there's been a number of key hurdles surmounted already through existing climate litigation that continues to go on and hopefully results in rulings vindicating charter rights in the climate context. And this case is slightly different because, as I noted, this is the first time there's been climate accountability legislation that sets out duties the federal government must follow in making and maintaining its climate plan. So just within the structure of that law and those duties, we say the government is not living up to its duties. It doesn't have a plan for achieving the targets. And there's a amendment process to remedy that. And at any time, it's open to the minister and the federal government to actually just do that. There's nothing standing in their way. Our lawsuit is seeking to compel them to do that because there's been now months and months where it's been clear the government does not intend to take the key measures in its plan.
Do you have I know this is very hard, but like a sense of how long this will take, whether it's, or, if the court needs to accept that they will hear this case. So can you give us a sense of like the timeline and the next steps?
Yeah. There's no requirement for leave to get before the court in this case, so the court doesn't need to accept that it will hear it. The case has been filed and it will proceed. Judicial review applications are meant to be summary procedures that move relatively quickly, and we certainly hope that this one will. And as I say, at any point, it's open to the federal government to just do what we say the law compels them to do anyway. And that would be an excellent outcome. But in any event, we are hoping for a hearing within the not too distant future, later this year, early next year, something like that. We think that this case should move urgently as it relates to the plan for the 2030 target, which is now not so far away. And the climate crisis, grows in importance every year.
All right, this will conclude our press conference. Ceci conclut la conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you.